In response to this, we get distinct changes that occur within the muscle. The distinct changes that occur within the muscle are based off of two distinct factors. The first factor is referred to as overload. Overload simply says that what I'm being asked to move is greater than what I'm able to move. This means that I'm going to be experiencing more eccentric muscle contraction phase than what? Concentric or isometric. So, you're helping your buddy move. You have to lift up the sleeper sofa. You pick up the sleeper sofa and you can keep it here for a little bit of time, right? But your buddy didn't park the truck right next to the door. He parked it down and around the corner. So what do you have to do with the sleeper sofa? You don't have to walk it from the house around the corner to the truck. As you walk, what happens? You start experiencing what? Fatigue. The muscle now starts experiencing what? Overload. Because the resistance is greater than what? The capacity. The other thing that we have to look at is what's known as excessive workload. Excessive workload is based on what's known as time under tension. So, I'm carrying the sofa, but I can't let the sofa drop because my buddy's walking backwards in front of me. Well, what happens if I let the sofa drop? It's going to fall on my buddy, and now not only do I have to lift the sofa, but I'm also going to have to lift what? My buddy. If we have an excessively long length of contraction, we start accumulating a large amount of ROS, a large amount of energetic metabolites, and start experiencing ion imbalance. All of these trigger internal responses within the muscle. Why are we going to get internal responses within the muscle? Well, the overload is going to what? It's going to damage the sarcomere. If I have damage to the sarcomere, I have to have an internal response in order to get the sarcomere what? Repaired. If I can't get the sarcomere repaired, is it going to do me any good? No. The excessive overload is going to cause an inability for me to have a recruitment factor going on. Because I don't have the ATP available, the fibers have to undergo a repolarization phase. In order to combat these, the muscle does a couple of unique things. In terms of overload, we're going to get additional proteins. Why do we want additional proteins? Because we want to have a larger what? We want to have what? Larger cross-sectional area. So remember, larger cross-sectional area gives me more what? Force. Not more force, but more strength. Remember, strength is how much load I can take per unit area. So if I have a larger area, I can withstand what? More force. We get additional proteins, and the most important of these additional proteins is going to be what? Actin and myosin. Not only are we going to get more actin and myosin, but we're going to get more what? Connective tissue. have excessive workload, I'm going to change the way in which the mitochondria are functioning. I'm going to change the way in which the mitochondria are functioning so that I can get a greater what? ATP. Because the more I can regenerate the ATP, the longer I can have the myosins do what? The power stroke. The longer I have the myosin do the power stroke, the longer I can do what? Well, not say work out, but just have the muscle what? Contract. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my ability to recycle my creatine. So I can use that creatine pathway for more than how many seconds? 6. So sprinters, Usain Bolts, run the 100 in approximately what? They're not there yet, except for the dopers. But then they're all dopers. That's one story. They're around 9.8 seconds. The cleans are around 9.9. Which means that they're all, in terms of how the muscles are contracting, they're almost going to be entirely that first energetic pathway. The creatine pathway. The more they train at that level, the longer they can go on that creatine pathway. Which means that they may not actually need more what? Mitochondria, because they're not doing aerobic stuff, they're simply doing what? Anaerobic stuff.
So you can train your body to go through the anaerobic cycle
Yep.
more?
Mm-hmm. How do we get the changes? We get the changes based off the set principle. I'll explain why in a second. The overload, regardless of how it occurs, either through excessive workload or because I ask it to do more than what it can do, leads to what's commonly referred to as muscle soreness. And there are two distinct classes of muscle soreness. There is acute muscle soreness, and there is delayed muscle soreness. There are two types of acutes. There's what's called acute onset, and there's what's called acute insidious. Insidious means what?
Terrible thing.
Terrible thing, something that's evil, if you want to think about it that way. Ames, acute insidious, is a gastric injury. Means that the muscle belly or the tendon has them what? You've ruptured it. Ames, the acute insidious, is an injury. OMS, acute onset, occurs because there's too much what building up in the muscle? Heat. Acute onset, the OMS, AOMS, starts to develop about 35 to 40 seconds within a strenuous muscle contraction. And remains for 2 to 3 hours following the strenuous contraction. So you help your body move. While you're moving, you start feeling your muscles ache. The aching of the muscles goes away about an hour or so after you've finished the move. That is what? Acute onset. That's OMS. You help your body move. and he loads up your arms with 6 boxes of books. All of a sudden, you feel a sharp, stabbing snap in your bicep tendon. And the boxes do what? Drop. That is what? Ains. You get done helping your buddy move, and the next morning, you cannot what? Move. That is DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. DOMS is the accumulation of OMS. So, I felt a little soreness, but I'm still helping my buddy move. I'm feeling a little bit more soreness, but I'm still what? Helping my buddy move. The next morning, I'm really tired, and I can't what? Lift my arm. That's DOMS. DOMS has an inception point of about 12 to 24 hours following strenuous muscle contraction. It subsides about 72 hours after. Any new muscle activity triggers DOMS, particularly if you have overload involved. Have you ever started an exercise program? The next day, you're really what? Sore. And you weren't expecting to be sore, and so what do? You stop doing the exercise program. If I ask the muscles to contract cyclically for 3.5 hours, the muscles are going to adapt to be able to what? Contract cyclically for 3.5 hours. So if I decided to run a marathon, the muscles will adapt for me to be able to what? Run a marathon. If I want to lift 1,000 pounds, the muscles will adapt for me to be able to what? Lift 1,000 pounds. However, I cannot ask a muscle to adapt to lift both 1,000 pounds and function cyclically for what? 3.5 hours. 2 distinct adaptations. The muscle cannot adapt to do both. It will try to do both, but the end result will be catastrophic for both activities. Same thing happens with the muscles. Muscles are good soldiers. They're going to do what you ask it to do. So if I ask it to do everything under the sun, the muscles will learn to do what? Everything under the sun. And they'll adapt to be able to do what? Everything under the sun. But they won't be able to do a specific thing. They'll be able to do everything. The said principle leads to the issue of structure equating to function. The structure of the muscle in its adaptations will equate to the new function for that muscle. Most of the structural changes that we see in terms of the said principle is based off of a change in fiber typing. In which the type 1 fibers stay as a type 1 fiber. You don't change fiber types. But it becomes a different subclass of the type 1 fibers. The type 2 fibers stay at what? Type 2 fiber they simply change how they function. Here's the cool thing. These two X's, when they get used, become 2A's. 2A's, when they get disused, become a 2X. New and novel to what you're doing. That new and novel stuff triggers a SED response. The way in which it triggers a SED response is through a sequential compensation mechanism. The first one is we're going to alter either how we're going to sustain the contraction, or we're going to alter how we get the fibers recruited, or we're going to alter how big are those fibers. And it always goes in this order here in terms of compensation.
Compensation in response to the muscle.
In response to the muscle contracting.
So biochemical is like short term, like 6 seconds.
Well, biochemical is how long can I allow that muscle fiber to be recruited? So it may send a signal that says, hey, we need more calcium here. Or, hey, we need to be able to regenerate ATP more efficiently. This here, the neurological, is how is my brain recruiting the muscle that needs to cause force. The last one is actual hypertrophication. Either where the muscle fiber itself gets larger, or where the whole entire muscle belly does what? Gets larger. So let's take a look at this sequence of events in terms of a change of recruitment and a change of size. So, when we start recruiting, we always start with a synchronous recruitment, where I go from low through moderate and eventually to what? And eventually to high, hopefully getting to the point where I meet the demand. This is highly inefficient. It's highly inefficient because I have to go in a stepwise fashion. It's so much easier to jump steps than it is to walk slowly up the steps. The other thing it allows me to do is it allows me to change what part of the muscle I'm recruiting. The asynchronous recruitment changes the order that I'm going to recruit the muscle, so I don't have to go what? Low to middle to what? High. If I know I have to automatically recruit the high, the first thing I'm going to recruit is what? The high. If I know that I only need to recruit 60% of my whole muscle, I'm only going to what? Recruit 60% of my muscle. As I learn to do the contraction, and as I'm able to do the asynchronous recruitment, I can cycle what part of the muscle is being recruited at distinct times. Which means that initially I can only do the contraction for, say, 5 seconds. Now I can do the contraction for what? 10 seconds. Now I can do the contraction for what? 15, then 20, then what? 40, so on and so forth, until I can do it for a prolonged static time.
Skipping those steps is plasticity.
Skipping the steps is plasticity. That's the asynchronous recruitment issue. And the nice thing with that asynchronous recruitment is that I can stop doing that activity, and as soon as I come back and start the same pattern again, I immediately know what? How to go about recruiting. And we will ride a bike. And we will have ever ridden a bike. If you've ever ridden a bike, and all of a sudden you get put back on a bike, you can do what? Ride the bike. It may take you a couple of seconds in order to figure out how to balance myself again, but you can ride the bike. At the same time that we have that asynchronous recruitment going on, we're going to have a change going on within the sarcomeres. So, here's the sarcomere in terms of the typical pattern of contraction. We start with what happens if I have too much load. If I have too much load, I'm going to start recruiting. I recruit from the center outward, and I recruit until I can eventually get enough to match the resistance. Notice what's happening to the amount of fiber that's being recruited. I've recruited everything I can, but I still can't move. All of a sudden I have damage. That damage triggers what? Pain. I now undergo a repair process. The repair process is now going to ensure that I have enough proteins to withstand that force that ripped me apart. As I go through, what do you notice about the size of the fibers within? They get bigger. And it's all there so that I can withstand whatever force ripped me apart.
Is that why people that go to the gym drink protein shakes?
They drink protein shakes because of bad science. A muscle is only going to grow if I cause enough damage to the sarcomere to trigger that response. For the people who do lifting weights, drinking protein may give you what's known as a positive nitrogen balance, but it does not stimulate additional hypertrophication. People who do endurance exercise need the additional protein because energetics. Because we're going to break down protein in order to meet the ATP use, and we have to replace that somehow. For people who do endurance stuff, it's better to consume the protein prior than after, because if I can consume it prior, I reduce the amount of protein that's being broken down while I'm doing activity. It's also why people who follow a low-calorie diet need to increase the amount of protein they have in their diet to counterbalance the breakdown of protein to meet energetic demands.
So make the myosin actin bigger when you need the amino acids from the protein?
You do. You do need to have the positive nitrogen balance. But you don't have to, this is the thing, you don't have to consume it immediately after. You simply have to have a positive nitrogen balance. And in that, the maximum that you can withstand within your body in terms of consumption is 2.7 grams per kilogram of body mass. But here's the kicker. You get no positive benefit unless you are low calorie, below 1.6 grams per kilogram of body mass. Like I said, the protein stuff comes from some good science, but also some from very bad science. And also comes from what's known as ancidental responsing, which means that, and the Hawthorne effect, which means that if I perceive something that I think to be true, I'm going to perceive it as being what? True. Also, if I'm being observed, I'm more likely to change my behavior to fit the observer's point of view. So, how do we get this compensation? It's all about the set principle. So, how do we get this compensation? It's all about the set principle. And let's look at it from the mechanical overload issue, not from the energetic issue. So the first thing I have to do when I have mechanical overload is I have to try to recruit more fibers. Because unless the fibers get bigger, the only way for me to get more force out of the muscle is to get a larger total muscle contracting. As I recruit more, hopefully, I'm able to match what?
The load.
The load. If I'm able to match the load, I get no further neurological recruitment. However, if I can't meet that, which means I've recruited as much of the muscles as I possibly can recruit, and I still have mechanical overload, now I have to have a biochemical change. Now I have to start laying down more what? More proteins. This is where the only time we need that additional protein is when we have enough overload to trigger this. And most people who go to the gym don't lift enough load in order to trigger this. Mainly because they don't periodize and pattern their exercises correctly. As I start producing more proteins within the muscle, I have to learn how to what? Recruit that new muscle. So I have to learn how to go through that synchronous phase and then through the what? Asynchronous phase in order to get back to the initial overload amount. If I still can't make enough, now I have to get more contractile proteins and more connective tissue proteins in order to generate what? Overload. At this point in time here, we start seeing the muscle getting what? A little bit larger. If that little bit larger still can't give me enough force, I continue to add more proteins. As I add more proteins, I have to learn how to what? Recruit those new proteins again. And it continues until what? Oh, until I can match the overload. The muscle will continue to adapt as long as I continue to what? Overload the muscle. And there's a continuum on this, and we'll pick this up on Monday.